Our theme this month is the joy of living, and today's topic is dealing with the conditions of life. And, as you will recall, the bulk of the material that I'm using as references this month is from a series of talks both in classes and in private sessions for the ever-increasing numbers of people in Southern California that Dr. Holmes spoke to beginning in 1916. Ernest Holmes and his brother Fenwick established a home in Venice, California in 1916 for metaphysical treatment services, and Ernest was lecturing in auditoriums in the Los Angeles area. In 1918, they established a metaphysical sanitarium in Long Beach and maintained a lecture hall and treatment offices in Los Angeles. By 1920, he was also lecturing in large, well-known hotels like the Biltmore and the Ambassador. In 1927, he founded the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy. This later morphed into the Church of Religious Science, and in 1960, Holmes dedicated what was named Founders Church, the pivot for 101 other such churches throughout the world at that time, with membership exceeding 100,000 people. Dr. Holmes' central thesis was always his own definition of religious science, which he expressed as a correlation of the laws of science, opinions of philosophy, and revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of all. So, early in the 20th century, Ernest began lecturing, counseling, and writing to his students, to those who attended his gatherings, and eventually increasingly publishing his philosophy, which culminated in over 40 books in his lifetime. He was very clear that we are always dealing with conditions in life, and that we are surrounded by a psychic life, a subjective, creative, conscious, receptive, neutral, and plastic force, which is always receiving the impress of our thought. Gently but directly, he stressed that we find that, or it finds us, whether we are conscious of it or not. And then he said, which always gets our attention, every one of us is right where we are because of what we are and of what the world believes about us. Recognition of this, rather than denial, is necessary because this gives us a basis upon which to work, in order that we may become something which we do not now appear to be. I want to clarify a couple of terms he uses in these statements. When Holmes uses the term psychic, he means a spiritual person who is able to consciously function in the subjective. And when he says in the subjective, he means that part of the mind which is set in motion as a creative thing by the conscious state of mind. Whew. Long sentences, and I find them necessary to assist us in understanding his train of thought. The basic statement, we are where we are because of what we are, is predicated upon, that is based upon, that. It is why we do spiritual mind treatment and affirmations, what he calls universal receptivity. The term universal receptivity made me laugh. I thought, I'm going to do my universal receptivity, meaning I'm going to do a spiritual mind treatment now. Here is how he directs the use of spiritual mind treatment. When you treat, feel that something is actually happening, no matter how great a responsibility lies in the thing that is to be done. Every demonstration must be made in peace and confidence, and in the realization of divine love, perfection, permeating everything. It is the law of cause and effect. He says the law of cause and effect, like, duh, everybody knows that. Truth be known, though, not everybody does know that, and how fortunate each of us here is, because we do know that, and we do know how to use it. Dealing with the conditions of life, Holmes reminds us, is building our faith in that by truly and consciously speaking our word and seeing it manifest. The most important part of this is first recognizing that God is our supply and that the words we speak are immediately recognized by that creative force. Part of the messages Holmes was bringing to the world back in the early 1900s was the law of mental equivalence. Those of you who are familiar with the works of Judge Thomas Troward will remember that law with joy. Dr. Holmes elaborates on the use of the law of mental equivalence, which he learned from Troward, and undoubtedly from others. In his glossary, he describes a mental equivalent as having a subjective idea of the desired experience. As we bring ourselves to a greater vision than the range of our present concepts, we can then induce a greater concept and thereby demonstrate more in our experience. Peter Kerner, author of the Believe formula, wrote this about the law of mental equivalence. The Wright brothers were dealing with two different realities. In one, everybody knew that it was impossible for man to fly. In the other, people witnessed Orville and Wilbur invent an airplane. It would have been much simpler for the Wright brothers to agree with common knowledge, or conventional wisdom, and recognize the fact that, and reality that, they were in a bicycle shop and not an airplane factory. To accept the truth and quit chasing a stupid dream. But they had a mental equivalent and were beset with a firm belief that man could fly. The Wright brothers couldn't predict the future, but they certainly cast their vote by building a good mental equivalent. In examples like the one about the Wright brothers and airplanes, we see that in some respects the old paradigm, that is, that humankind cannot fly, is the launching pad that sets the new mental equivalent in motion. Launching pad. Interesting, isn't it, that phrase? Launching pad popped into my mind when I was researching material for this talk. Because from the moment the Wright brothers' first airplane left the ground and was airborne, the world was changed. Propeller-driven airplanes came into being. Jet aircraft followed. Helicopters appeared. Rocket ships were launched and traveled into the great cosmos. So if you think that a mental equivalent is no big deal, think again. It can be a big deal. And although you think your mental equivalent or mine is penny ante by comparison to Orville and Wilbur Wright, consider that they were not envisioning rockets to the moon and beyond, or even helicopters landing on ships out in the ocean. They wanted to fly, like a bird, like a cloud. I don't know. But I do know they achieved their mental equivalent and gave it to humankind. They used the law of cause and effect and dealt with the conditions of life in doing so. In every book Ernest Holmes wrote, and every talk or lecture he gave, was the use of cause and effect. And very frequently, he gave examples of the results of treatments he or other practitioners had done, including in this synopsis, Love and Law, of his work in the early 1900s. In the Science of Mind text, for example, there are 2 chapters titled Physical Perfection and Physical Perfection Concluded. Many other authors, in the wake of this brave journey into the practice of metaphysics in today's world, many other authors have addressed this as well. For example, Louise Hay, Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Eric Butterworth, Bernie Siegel, Eckhart Tolle, Carolyn Myss, Robert Ormsted, Catherine Ponder, Larry Dossey, Fred Luskin, Richard Carlson, Lisa Rankin again, Greg Braden, and a plethora of others you will know. How blessed we are to have access not only to the ancient, medieval, earliest 20th century thinking, but to experience it unfolding through the words and actions of people right here among us. Dealing with the conditions in today's world are more expanded because the world is more expanded. And our access to what is going on is much quicker and more extensive. So the availability of the current day thinkers and practitioners is in keeping with the potential for us to keep up with it and to apply a time-tested spiritual practice which continues to be effective and positive. As I said at the beginning of this talk, what Holmes described as a correlation of the laws of science, opinions of philosophy, and revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of all. Dr. Holmes believed that people are an individualization of creative spirit, and through their self-awareness and power of choice can control the health of their bodies and the conditions of environment by affirmative meditation, which he called spiritual mind treatment. To this end, he maintained the necessity of understanding the principle of the law of mind, which responds automatically to any demand put upon it. Successful, wise, and affirmative employment of this law results in what we call good. He believed that the final outcome lies in the receptivity of the individual. With all of this for us to draw from, surely the joy of living is magnified, amplified, enhanced, and heightened by applying these principles to the conditions of our lives. And so it is.